Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to discuss my iPad-based live rig, how it's set up, and talk about my experiences using it live and in rehearsals. The whole rig lives inside this tiny backpack, and inside is this small pedal board by Pedaltrain and the iPad, and a bunch of cables as well. The whole rig consists of the iPad, of course, which is running by SFX, and then the pedal board has my wireless receiver, a tuner, and this really cool audio interface. The cool thing about this rig is that everything runs on battery. The audio interface is powered by the iPad. The iPad has plenty of battery power, and all I have to do to be ready to play is hook these two things up. The reason they're unhooked normally is because the battery drains. They're on basically if there's a patch cable there, so I keep that unplugged, and then I just hook the audio interface up to the iPad with a USB cable, and then I can just unlock my iPad and just turn on by SFX. And I'm ready to go. And in terms of being heard, you're just gonna hook up an XLR cable or a TRS cable to the front of house or to the mixing board and the PAs in your rehearsal studio. So now let's look at how my personal preset sounds, and rather than telling you, let me show you. So before I get to the sound demo, I just wanted to mention two small but pretty important things. The first of these is that in SFX, delay trails do not carry over. So let me give you a demo of that. I've got my lead tone right now with the delay engaged, and I'm just gonna play a note. So you can hear those delay trails, but if in the middle of those delay trails I swap back to my rhythm tone, check out what happens. Instantly gone. So then what happens is that if I'm playing a lead part and then I go back to rhythm, the space that's created by that lead part just suddenly gets cut off and disappears. And I'm not sure how many people in the crowd would notice that, but I definitely noticed that. To me, it's a pretty big deal. An additional point to note here is that switching presets, just like on most modelers really, even on my high-end Quad Cortex, causes a drop in sound. So let me just demonstrate that. Anyway, let's get to the sound demo, and for this I'm just gonna play a little bit out of one of my band's songs, and I'm actually gonna have one of those parts where I play a bit of a lead and then go back into rhythm. So let me know if you notice the cutoff of the delay trails here. So what did you guys think of that? I'm actually gonna leave the isolated guitar track at the end of the video for anyone who's interested in listening to that without the mix basically. But for now, let's check out the actual iPad rig that I have set up. So now I'm just gonna talk you through my rig, how it's set up, and some of its limitations. So nothing too complex here. I've got a noise gate, a couple of experimental pitch shifters, a drive that I use on both of my signal branches, and then as you can see, the signal is split into two separate signal chains. And the reason for that is because I have two distinct sounds that I use in my band live. One of them is kind of a cleaned up sound, which is here on the bottom signal chain, and the other one is an overdriven, distorted rhythm and lead tone. Now, the reason I have these two distinct sounds in separate chains like this rather than on different presets is, as I mentioned earlier, when switching presets, you have that drop in sound for a fraction of a second, and to me that's just not good enough live. So if your rig needs more than two distinct sounds and you have to switch between them without a cutout in audio, you're gonna need to get creative by disabling and enabling amps on the same signal chain. When you switch between these chains using the splitter, you actually get absolutely no delay in the swap. And the way I do that is by assigning this signal switch here to one of the foot switches. So as you can see at the moment, it's sending my signal down the upper chain here through my distorted sound, and if I tap this foot switch, now it switches to both channels, and if I tap the foot switch again, it switches to the bottom channel only. I don't actually use both channels together, I only use one or the other, so every time I switch, sometimes I have to press the foot switch twice. So for example, going from the cleaner tone to my distorted tone only takes one foot switch press, but going to the cleaner tone from the distorted tone takes two. Now, of course, the slight downside of this is the fact that you can't see the state of what you're currently playing through other than on the screen. If you tap this element here, if you're on something else, you can't see what state that's in. As you can see, it doesn't change there. So it's helpful to have this selected whenever you're playing live, and to be able to see your iPad screen. Now, my rig is actually really simple. Down here, as you can see, it's a cleaner tone, so we've got a cleaner amp and we've got a compressor just to help me out with dynamics a bit. Of course, we've got reverb and delay. And in the distorted channel here, we've got a 5153 model, as well as a delay, reverb, and boost after the preamp. And I toggle those on and off for solos. So I just press this second button here to toggle all of them on, and when the solo is done, I just press it again to toggle them off, and I'm in my rhythm tone. So now let's talk about the pros and cons of this rig from my experience after having used it for many months for personal practice, in rehearsals, and even some live gigs. And starting with the pros, it is super easy to use with the iPad because of its huge responsive touchscreen. However, I'm not sure if it would be as easy to use with an iPhone, for example, as I haven't tried that. It's still a very compact setup. As you saw, it fits into that tiny backpack, despite the fact that I have this pedal board. It's also a fairly inexpensive solution for its class of audio quality if you already have an iOS device, so if you're just getting an interface and bias effects. It also seems to be fairly reliable. At least I haven't had a single problem with it, or even the hint of a problem. And I realize that's not saying much because I'm just one person, but it's saying something. And despite a bunch of people potentially disagreeing with me, I still think that you get some really respectable tones out of bias effects. And for the last of the pros, it's not really specifically to do with the iPad or bias effects, but solutions in general that go to front of house. And that's the fact that you just get a more consistent sound. Unless you bring your own cabinet and microphone, you're not reliant on those elements. Plus, you don't run the risk of bumping into a microphone on a cabinet on a tiny stage. And I don't know what kind of stages you guys play, but I play tiny stages, and there's 6 of us in our band. So now let's talk about the drawbacks of this rig. And the first one of these is multiple points of failure, especially this pesky USB cable. The USB interface is just not robust enough for stage scenarios. These connections are not strong and big enough, and they can easily be ripped out or even just broken. And this downside just means that you need to bring more spares with you, such as an extra USB cable. Another drawback here, and that's actually one that I mentioned in the pro section, is the fact that you're going to front of house. And while it does give you consistency, it also means that unless stage monitors are working very well, which they often aren't, you're getting no stage volume from your own instrument. Now, it's not something specific to the iPad or bias effects, and you can always circumvent that issue by plugging a TRS cable from your interface into the effects return of an amplifier and miking it up the regular way. Now, last but not least, it's the sound. And while I did say that the sound coming out of bias effects is very decent, in terms of its depth and richness, it's just not the best. As well as that aspect of the delay trails not carrying over, which to me is a pretty big deal. In my first impressions video for the iPad rig, I mentioned how a dedicated floor sim unit might be more robust and more convenient to use. And if you want to find out how this rig compares to arguably the best floor sim unit out there, the Quad Cortex, then you may want to check this video out where I compare them head to head. But that's it for this one. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.